Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This series is based on a quote that I had found by Stephen Jay Gould. He says, "First facts do not come to us as objective items, seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people." Again, that's kind of a mouthful. And I'm not that academic, but I had to digest it a while and take it apart. And what I understand is not all reasonable people see things the same way. And so that is my take on what he's trying to say. And then he gives an explanation of why we all don't see things the same way. He says, theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. This is an interesting quote that I have taken to build off of, to understand the origins debate, the different scientific models of origins. Counted, there's approximately about 6 models, and I didn't really know how to understand how they had scientists, academic men that supported each different model, and how was I to discern the differences and which model should I really support. I was not prepared to look at it this way, and so I have now taken what Stephen Jay Gould said, as he says, science, or actually men, first facts don't come to us. Facts do not come to us as objective items. Facts don't come with a sheet of specifications and of history. Facts come to us and we have to study them. We look at them, or the artifacts come, and then we make facts out of them by reading and having somebody interpret what those artifacts mean. But Stephen Jay Gould said is that all reasonable people do not see things the same way. And he says theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. The previous section that we had gone over was on culture and how our experience in seeing and understanding how culture influences how a group of people understand their reality, how a group of people think, how a group of people perceive, how a group of people can actually differ in the way that they need to be educated. And that was the challenge that was on my part, was being educated in one culture and then coming to a different culture and trying to educate in that culture by the same process of which I was educated, and it did not work. It was not that effective. And so this is why I had started studying culture. And then when I came across Stephen Jay Gould's just reference here that says theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose and the way in which we perceive them, I understood, yes, culture is a very strong influencer in how people perceive things. And so I agreed, but I got with culture, but theory, habit, and prejudice, where do they fit in? How do they fit into what Stephen Jay Gould was thinking? And what I came across was another quote, and this one kind of got my thinking going a little bit more. But it's by Richard Dawkins, who has a lot of quotes out there, and one of his quotes is from the preface of introduction to one of his books. And he says, quote, "I want to persuade the reader not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could, in principle, solve the mystery of our existence." Okay, chew on that one just for a minute, just for a little bit. One, he is a biologist. He's a British biologist. And he says, this is his motive for writing. This is his energizing force for what he's out there for. I want to persuade the reader, okay, of what? Of truth, I would imagine, of biology. Well, he says then, not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true. Okay, interesting. So his motivating factor is trying to persuade me or you or anybody else that reads his material that the Darwinian worldview is true. Which means Richard Dawkins' basis of doing science is on a worldview. But then he goes on. He says the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could, in principle, solve the mystery of our existence. That kind of caught my attention. Why? I want to persuade the reader not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could. Okay, so what he has done is he has equated theory with worldview. He's put them in the same sentence. And that's what I was not really equipped to handle. What's worldview have to do with theory? Well, this is what now is kind of like worldview equals theory. Then what does theory mean? And we have the glasses here, and worldview and theory and culture, I guess. Culture, yes. Worldview, yes. And now theory have to do with glasses, have to do with the scientific or just any human enterprise of studying and of trying to make sense of the world. We implement our culture, which we can't get rid of. It's the base from which we stand on, our culture. But then there's worldview and theory. Let's look at theory a little bit. I thought I knew a little bit about worldview, but theory, I thought I knew a little bit about it, but not in this perspective. So we started looking it up. What is theory? Well, theory comes from the Greek term Theorein, however you want to say that, okay? Theorein, which means to consider, to speculate, to look at. Okay. Now we're getting closer to worldview. Theory means to look at, or is based on word. It comes from the Greek words theia, which means to view, a view of something, and horon, which means to see. So the whole root of the word theory comes from two words that has to do with viewing and seeing, which, yeah, well, that's logical then of its association relationship to worldview. So he says a Darwinian worldview is the really only known theory. Okay, so he equates those two, and I never had. I didn't understand that connection, but now looking into it a little bit, yeah, okay, so theory comes from Theorein, which means to consider, to speculate, or to look at. Theia, which means to view something, horon, to see something, and theros, which is in the same family of words. It means spectator. So what we have is theory is a mental scheme by which to view the world. And if you look it up, the definitions of theory, it could say it's a particular concept, conception, or view of something. It's a particular conception or view of something that is to be done, or the method to do it. It's a system of rules or principles. So theory is a system of rules and principles, and it's a way of looking at something. It's a theoretical way of looking at something, which is very similar to the concept of worldview. So if we go back to what Richard Dawkins' quote was, I want to persuade the reader not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could, in principle, solve the mystery of our existence. So theory has to do with looking at something. Theory comes from the Greek words to view, to look. So a Darwinian theory is a way of looking at something through certain rules and principles and a framework, a grid from which to look out through, to see the world through. That's back to the glasses. The glasses are coming more together. The glasses reflect the person, the humanity that is wearing them. And the glasses now have a culture behind them. And that culture gives something to stand on, something firm that has molded my thinking. And now we have theory that is something that is their rules, their principles, and their ways of looking at things. So that fits the glasses too. And that fits what? Back to Stephen Jay Gould. First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. We now have culture and we have theory. What is still out there is habit and prejudice. But I think we'll get there. So in other words, what influences my viewing, my seeing, my interpreting the world is my culture. My culture does not determine it, but my culture influences it. And then from that cultural base of how to think and influences, then I take some assumptions and I make some assumptions. And through those assumptions, then I view the world through those theories, through that worldview. Thanks for joining me in this video, in this series. And this is going to be one of 5. So we're investigating worldview and how worldview influences our thinking, our viewing pattern. Thanks again for joining me. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. If you'd like to communicate with us, it's through doubleroadrover.com. That's the blog spot. And or directly through email, thn.academia@gmail.com. Again, thanks for joining me.